So your main character is a wizard, let's call him Graham. Graham the wizard who likes cats, and he can shoot lightning bolts. Not just any lightning bolts, but ultra deadly ones, which can kill anyone, anywhere, anytime. He can instantly heal any wound. Oh, and he can time travel. Overpowered characters can be a lot of fun to play with. I mean, they show up all the time in anime, and there's something compelling about these immense displays of power, watching a character at the peak of their abilities. And we can use them to explore all sorts of juicy ideas about the nature of power and God, but they also create a massive problem for your writing. How do you keep the story feeling tense and interesting when they can just, "A wizard did it," and the plot is solved? Well, some stories draw tension from the cost of wielding that power, others from moral dilemmas, from how power changes you as a person, and others from even more interesting places. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And you can already check out my next couple of videos right now on Nebula at the QR code on screen or link below. Part 1. Overwhelming power takes a toll. People are going to argue over what overpowered really means in the comments. Does it really count if they have a weakness or a limit? But we're going to be talking about characters who are immensely powerful, especially relative to other characters in the world, so much so that the story really has to find a way to grapple with it one way or another. One way these stories deal with this problem is wrestling with the mental and emotional toll overwhelming power has on a person. Take the Poppy War trilogy by R.F. Kuang. In that, the protagonist Rin's fire-wielding abilities do more than destroy her enemies whenever she wants. They destroy her sanity. She's arguably one of the most powerful individuals in the world, almost possessed by this godlike entity, and yet her biggest struggle is resisting the temptation of too much power and the corruption of her identity. Every time Rin calls on her power, we're not just wondering if she'll win the fight, but how much of her will survive it. Who she will become in the wake of it when it's her we care about. This is a huge part of Katsuhiro Otomo's now famous Akira, where the apocalyptic power the eponymous Akira wields is so overwhelming it literally just wipes away his personality and renders him a catatonic child. Or there's Tetsuo, whose new godlike abilities gives way too much power to the worst parts of his personality and erodes anything good left. He spends the time on a selfish rampage. This dynamic is something we see a lot with OP characters, this kind of magically induced madness or decline, as if to speak to how the human mind isn't built to handle this much power. Because power can be dangerous in more than just a lightning bolt to the face kind of way. It's morally and psychologically corrosive. In stories like The Poppy War or Akira or Lord of the Rings, we see humans take on godlike power that by its very nature was never really meant for them. The power demands something in return, whether it's their sanity or their humanity itself. These stories get us to ask, can we handle great power? Should we even want it? And you can raise the stakes of that mental toll with all sorts of creative dilemmas about how, or even if, these overpowered characters should use their abilities at all, especially when their values sometimes clash with the very nature of that overwhelming power, turning what could be an easy solution into a complex internal struggle. Like in Avatar: The Last Airbender, Aang has access to the Avatar state, a raw, godlike force of judgment and destruction. But he's also a pacifist? Well, sort of. Let's just ignore those for the moment, because even when the fate of the world is on the line, he still has to ask himself, is using this power to kill right, or does it turn him into something he never wanted to be? And that's why overpowered characters can be so interesting. They create problems for the narrative, yeah, but also really interesting conflicts which let you get to the heart of who a character really is. It can challenge their best values and exaggerate their weaknesses with the temptations of ultimate power. Especially because, well, think about it, just having that immense power can make everything else about you seem irrelevant to the rest of the world, because you can look at any problem and go, "A wizard did it." Bam, problem solved. Are you allowed to have hobbies or personal desires when you could be saving people, even if you didn't choose the power for yourself? Is love a luxury you can afford when it puts them in danger? Suddenly anything outside of your destiny and responsibility can be painted as selfish, even evil. A god who has abdicated. But I do think it's really easy to fall into the trap of only exploring these characters through their relationship with their power. But I think that can make them a bit one-dimensional. You want to give them moments, give give them scenes where they get to be someone out of it, or at least we get to see who they want to be outside of it. Hobbies, interests, which they might have had before that power or that they wish they could pursue now but just aren't given the chance to. How much of that person still exists and how much of that is swallowed up by responsibility or madness. Alternatively, another way to inject tension into your story is to give your OP characters incomparable problems. What this means is giving them challenges which their overwhelming power just isn't really equipped to solve, at least not directly. This also gets around the problem of power scaling and power creep, which is really prevalent in stories with OP characters, especially in anime, where like the only measure of tension is just upping the challenge and the power level compared to the main character.
It's over 9,000!
You want to be looking at tension horizontally, not just vertically. Sure, they might be able to wipe out an army without a thought, but what happens when they need to negotiate a peace treaty? In the Poppy War trilogy, Ren's power is pure destruction. She is great at burning things down, but building something new from the ashes? Not so much. She struggles with diplomacy, strategy, and leadership because her power doesn't solve those problems for her. In fact, it makes them worse. And that tension can force fascinating character growth as they overcome blind spots. Or in some cases, like Ren in the Poppy War, the OP character might resist that growth they need to undergo because people incorporate their abilities into their sense of self, and that's gotta be a huge thing if you are massively overpowered. You rely on it, it defines you, it's your achievements, it's your failures. Being asked who are you outside of your abilities, outside these few things that you're really good at, can feel like an attack on your person, and it can blind you to other ways to solve problems, to ways that you need to change and grow. Do they resist other solutions because it might mean giving up some of their influence? Or if they do try another way of doing things, then does that come with values and lessons of its own? Lessons that might challenge how they think, how they feel, the role their power is meant to play, that maybe change how they wield their power altogether. A lot of these stories look at how their immense power can isolate them from others. Shigo Mob Kageyama from Mob Psycho 100 is a great example. His psychic abilities are so OP that if he loses control, people can die, they can get hurt really easily. After he accidentally injured his little brother, Mob learns to suppress his emotions entirely, bottling them up to avoid disaster, and the result? He becomes distant and passive, withdrawn, and he struggles to connect with other people. He's constantly wrestling with himself, trying to prove that despite his overwhelming power, he's still just a regular kid who wants to belong and make friends. The nature of your character's power might mean that they can never live an ordinary life, the life they want. If people are afraid of their power, it can stop them from forming normal human relationships, or even functioning as a person. Like Mob, your character might use their power as a reason to not risk getting close to others as much as they want to. They're not really emotionally well regulated. The basic rule is that it's okay to be overpowered if it helps generate conflict. This is why overpowered doesn't always mean unstoppable. Limitations, being emotional, physical, sociological, don't make the character less overpowered so much as it just changes where the challenge lies in this narrative. Like the Scholarman's trilogy by Naomi Novik, who is a fantastic author by the way. The protagonist here, Elle, is absurdly powerful. She's got this great affinity for destructive, almost evil magic, and she can take out hordes of monsters with ease, but then give her a simple spell, something requiring delicate precision, and she struggles. It's like wielding a claymore to butter bread. I don't have a claymore, but I do have a big stick. Or there's Hunter x Hunter, which I have a vivid memory of getting flamed online for not talking about when I first made my magic systems videos, so here you go.
Welcome to the Gulag. If you survive, you earn your freedom.
But the whole magic system in Hunter x Hunter regularly features OP abilities, but they're mostly kept in check by really creative limitations. It's sort of a contract-based magic system. Like the protagonist Gon can instantly become the most powerful person in the world ever, but he has to sacrifice all his future potential power to do it. Limitations don't have to feel just like arbitrary nerfs to keep the character grounded and the story feeling interesting. You can have them be significantly meaningful. Maybe every time Gray and the Wizard Who Likes Cats uses a lightning bolt, it costs 3 lives of a nearby cat. Opposing characters might try to find creative ways to tackle that, to exploit that weakness. Like in Legend of Korra, Zahir actually turns the Avatar's overwhelming power against Korra by poisoning her and attempting to kill her in the Avatar state, thereby ending the cycle forever. Of course, he still loses because Korra's a beast, but still, it was a good plan. Like I said, overpowered doesn't mean unstoppable, it can just mean having to reckon with the nature of that character's power. What you don't want is what a lot of power fantasy anime falls into, where the only way to keep up the tension is by introducing people with even more ridiculously OP abilities. It's kinda lazy, gets boring, and your characters struggle to feel grounded anymore. But overpowered characters don't just create problems for the narrative, right? Like, they're fun to play with because they also create part 2 opportunities. Possibilities. The moment an OP character enters your world, it's like throwing a rock in a pond. The ripples spread fast. Their power is going to create a new center of gravity around which everything else is going to have to accommodate. You cannot just ignore it. And there is no better example of this than Pantheon, which is an incredible animated series that's just landed on Netflix. It's based on these amazing stories by Ken Liu. I beg you, please watch them, please support it. It is just fantastic. They go so well together and they're a great exploration of OP characters as well. But it's about a world where instead of creating super smart artificial intelligences, we instead upload the human mind, the greatest machine ever created. These become uploaded intelligences, UIs, these godlike figures who can hack any server, shut down power grids, activate nuclear weapons, infiltrate security systems with ease, with barely a thought, operating on the internet and basically unkillable. Their mere existence rewrites the rules of war, of power. It triggers an almost Cold War-esque arms race to create more and the most powerful UI. The whole show is a fascinating exploration of geopolitics in a world where overpowered characters are suddenly political players and also kind of everywhere, but also surrounded by incredibly weak people who cannot do anything to stop them, who exist at their mercy. In fact, the UIs almost become a species of their own who have to find a way to coexist with humanity. So you want to ask how the institutions of your world in your story accommodate for this walking nuclear weapon you've got going around. How do they reckon with the fact that there is this thing which can at any time just challenge the way things are run, which can upset society at any time and possibly cannot be controlled? And we can take this down to a very human level. Characters don't exist in isolation. We kind of have to imagine them as part of your character web, the web of relationships and conflicts which really make up your story. An OP character is necessarily going to occupy a pretty important place within that web, the mentor, a hero, a rival, but perhaps the most interesting opportunity is actually to ask what happens when that OP character disappears or dies. What happens to that character web?
But when the world needed him most, he vanished.
Like in My Hero Academia, All Might is the most powerful hero in the world, bar none, or at least he was. At the start of the anime, he can only use his power for 3 hours a day, and that limit decreases until basically he's gone. The system became way too reliant on that one overpowered man holding everything together, and then he was gone. Crime skyrocketed, the public loses faith in the idea of heroes, and suddenly everyone who has spent years relying on All Might's strength has to figure out how to pick up the pieces. Here, the presence of overwhelming power and the sudden deprivation is the inciting incident. It is the spark for other characters to grow, to change. In this sense, you're thinking about your OP character not just as kind of like a character in isolation on their own journey, but the impacts that they have to have on the people around them. If your OP character disappears or dies or loses their ability, who rises to fill their place? I mean, they occupy a certain position in the world you've created. That's going to create a vacuum, especially one with a huge amount of power at stake. Suddenly, the things that they were deterring, the things they were making happen, are not going to happen and are not going to be deterred anymore. When an overpowered character enters the playing field, a lot of the tension can come from the need to control their character and what happens when they can't. Likewise, how does their mere existence force other characters around them to change? Overpowered characters aren't just powerful people and players in the world, they represent a powerful force for certain ideas, philosophies that they cling to, ways of thinking about the world. Like in Pantheon, it is transhumanism. The UIs are pushing this idea that humanity should ascend into this new way of living, leave behind the flesh. They challenge the definition of the human and force that conversation to the front. For All Might, it's being a good person who stands up for what's right. So what do your OP characters kind of represent, and what do they force into the public conversation? One really unique take on this, and you've probably seen this before, is when the power kind of exists as a force of its own outside of the protagonist. It can sometimes be sentient. In the Puppy War trilogy, the Phoenix god that gifted Ren its power is a living force with its own desires, its own agenda to burn and purge. The Phoenix doesn't care about Ren's personal struggles. Why would it? It's a god, basically. It fuels those who can summon it, but at a cost. It demands anger and pain and revenge in return. That's what makes its power so compelling. It's a player in its own right instead of a passive force waiting to be wielded. And as writers, we can play around with this other degree of tension between the character and the power that they are wielding as like another entity, you know? Is it sentient, like with Rincewind in The Color of Magic, where it quite literally forces Rincewind back into the plot every time he tries to run away? How does this power with desires and objectives of its own work with this character who also has desires and objectives of their own? How do they influence each other? What does it demand of them, and what does it demand of the world? But what happens when the OP character finally meets someone who can go toe-to-toe with them, who can match their power level? These dynamics can take a lot of forms: rivalries, alliances, even romance, but these dynamics also provide the opportunity for escalation that may not have been there before, and with that, new risks and dilemmas. Like maybe Graham the Wizard Who Likes Cats never had the chance to reach the full extent of his lightning bolt power until he faced Greta the Witch Who Loves Dogs. It's only once other UIs show up in Pantheon that they actually get really dangerous and violent, threatening to use nuclear weapons against each other and putting the rest of the world at risk, because prior to that, they didn't really need to use the full extent of their power. And I think that conflict escalating actually brings us to one of the reasons that people really love these stories. It's those scenes where the OP character finally gets to stop holding back. I'm not really much of a superhero person, but there's this really fun scene where Superman, kind of the original OG OP character, meets Darkseid, and he finally gets to let loose, and he has this speech. He describes himself as living in a world of cardboard where he has to constantly be careful about not breaking anything, being careful with his power. But here, with Darkseid, he's finally met a guy who can take it. And he does. And then he beats the crap out of him, and it's fun to watch. It is glorious. It's great to see a character like this just at the peak of their power. And let's be real, these moments aren't just about spectacle, it's about catharsis. It's about punching your fist in the air as you get to see the full extent of their strength unburdened by caution. And that's where things get even more interesting for the character inside them. You know, how do they feel about actually being able to wield this power at last? Do they find their own power terrifying? Do they cross a line they can't come back from? Do they kind of miss it when they can't use this level of violence? But perhaps the most unique solution to maintaining tension with OP characters actually comes from one of the most popular anime from last year, Frieren Beyond Journey's End. At the heart of the series is this mage who is uber powerful, so powerful that she basically defeats every antagonist they come across with a one-shot. I'm not kidding. Doesn't even break a sweat when killing a general of the Demon King. More than this though, the show goes out of its way to repeatedly let us think we've seen how powerful she truly is, and then go, nope, actually, she's even more powerful than that. Here's another laser blast. It's almost comical, but it works because the show is fundamentally just not about fighting. Like, her being OP is kinda not the point. The show doesn't even try to trick us into really getting invested in whether she will ever win. It's so much more about her learning to socialize with mortals, to just connect with other characters and mend old relationships. If anything, the moments of combat don't ask who will win, but work to reveal more about Frieren herself, her fears, the way she perceives the world, and that's what we're invested in. Like, there's this fight where she's up against herself, and it's all about her internalizing how, despite looking so harmless, she knows how terrifying she can be, how much she hides her power, learning what it must be like for others to face her, as well as kind of revealing how her overwhelming power manages to hide her weaknesses she should have worked on. Overwhelming power can be used as spectacle to explore other things and other people. One really interesting iteration of what overwhelming power can do for a story is how the presence of an unstoppable force can create an almost atmosphere of dread and inevitability. You actually see this a lot in horror, in cosmic horror especially. Like, Still Wakes the Deep is compelling in part because there's this entity that infects the game's oil rig. There is no overcoming it. The only thing you can do is run and hide, and this forces the story to shift from strategy to survival to the sheer psychological weight of facing something that you know cannot be beaten, that is vaster and greater and will always be greater than you. We can use overwhelmingly powerful entities here to mirror our own experiences with coming up against forces beyond our control. It can sometimes be a natural disaster, the inevitable creep of time, death itself. Like the victims in these stories, we can't fight back in any meaningful way. We can only adapt, endure, and hope to survive as long as we can. There's this fantastic horror book called Psychonopledia by Reza Nagarastani, which actually reimagines oil as a kind of ancient, dark, cosmic horror entity which we extract, and it corrupts and feeds on us and will ultimately destroy us. But all of these stories of why we use OP characters as a way to dive into Part 3, the nature of power. Ever heard the saying, if you want to find out who a man is, give him power? Overpowering a character does exactly that. You can use overwhelming power to reveal who a character truly is on a fundamental level, what they really want, the lengths they're willing to go to get it. The way they wield power, or even refuse to, is an expression of their values and inner conflicts. Like in Akira, Tetsuo really reveals his inferiority complex in his sadism, finally the opportunity to pay the world back for everything it's done to him. Or look at Aang and his desire for non-violence despite having the Avatar state. Light Yagami from Death Note reveals he's an utterly megalomaniacal psychopath who would kill God if he could. As an overpowered character leaves their vulnerability and weaknesses behind, they risk abandoning or losing what connects them to humanity as a whole. Dr. Manhattan from the Watchmen universe is a great example of this. Experiencing the past, present, and future all at once makes human emotions and struggles feel small, even incomprehensible. He says, "The world's smartest man means no more to me than it does the smartest termite." To Dr. Manhattan, people become like ants compared to him, struggling with things that don't matter in the grand scheme. I mean, he escapes to Mars to flee the noise, the chaos, and futility of humanity, and also because there's a chance his radiation-ridden body is maybe giving people cancer, but he compares himself here to a villain in a world which wants to believe in hope because he doesn't believe in free will so much. What's happened will always happen to him, and hope is kind of pointless. Omniscience almost turns Manhattan into the opposite of characters like Superman or All Might, these symbols of hope and forces for active, positive change. Having no real equals, no substantial weaknesses they share with everyone else can really change how a character like this relates to the rest of the world. Like Dr. Manhattan, they can start to see themselves as a different entity, a different kind of thing, even better than humanity. Consider this quote from Part 3 of The Poppy War, The Burning God. "I am the force of creation. I am the end and the beginning. The world is a painting and I hold the brush. I am a god." Ren starts to see herself as the ultimate force of power in the world because she kind of is, untethered from humanity and from her humanity. And it's in this that we can use these stories with godlike characters to interrogate some really interesting philosophical questions about what that means, the presence of people like this in the universe we occupy. In Lord of the Rings, Gandalf is an envoy sent by God to help in the struggle against darkness. He is overwhelmingly powerful when he needs to be, but his role is to guide and counsel. In a way, Gandalf here mirrors the concept of why God doesn't swoop in to solve everything for us, because to Tolkien, he wants to allow for humanity to have the agency to make their own choices, to find their own path to grow. And I've actually got a video where I talk about why Gandalf didn't take the ring to Mordor himself, which delves into this a lot more, and I reckon you should go watch that at the link down below. Or consider the Barnhouse effect by Kurt Vonnegut. A man develops these incredible powers of telekinesis and goes on to do something pretty strange. He starts destroying the world's weapons and nuclear stockpiles. And yet at the same time, we know that all the governments around the world are trying to replicate the telekinetic powers that this one guy has until right at the end of the story, someone does it. It's a story about humanity's relationship to power, that even if someone went around and destroyed all of our weapons, we would never let ultimate power lie. We crave power too much and are ultimately on an inevitable upscaling towards the weapon which will destroy us. These stories get us to ask, what is power? Is power inherently corruptive? Is the desire for power an inherently evil thing? What's more powerful, a nuclear missile or a small act of kindness? Are societies and civilization fundamentally built on coercion and the use of force? The research for this video sent me down a rabbit hole of finding the most OP characters and abilities and kinds of magic, and honestly I was baffled by how powerful some stories let their characters be. And I got thinking about what the most powerful kind of magic was, and the answer was obvious in the end, right? Like, it's love magic, the power of friendship. You probably already had that in your head, and I know that might sound dumb, but it keeps showing up in fantasy again and again. There is something powerful about the way love transforms us, and the more I looked into it, the more fascinating I actually found it really was. Like, why is a mother's love more uniquely powerful than other kinds of love? And it's really interesting how the rise of romantasy has actually changed how love magic kind of shows up in these stories. It just became more and more fascinating for me the deeper I looked. Easily one of the most fun and interesting questions I've been able to look into in a long time. I wanted to make a video about this, and so I did. I've already made it, actually, and you can watch it right now at the link down below over on Nebula, or the QR code on screen. It all very much connects in with the discussion of OP characters in this video, and I think you'd really like it if you liked this one. We talk about the costs and limits and demands of magic system, and how that all weirdly works with love magic and why it's so OP. And you can get all of that, plus all my other content, ad-free, and that does matter to me because I was watching Prime the other day, and then it showed me an advert on a streaming service, and that infuriated me to my very core. But no, you can get all of this, all these videos, ad-free over on Nebula, and I'm going to be keeping up with this. You're going to be getting these videos a long time before anyone else. Nebula is kind of OP itself, I've realized. It's the space that we've got for creators to tell stories without the restrictions and influence of algorithms and corporate interests. You know, we brought all of the best creators together, like me, into one place, and it's somewhere we can make better content and that you can watch it without interruptions, without ads. We don't want that. You don't want that. It infuriates me. And guess what? It's cheap. Cheaper than I realized at first. Just a few bucks a month. And even better, I can get you 40% off, $36 a year or a cheap coffee a month at my QR code. That is really important. It tells them that I sent you. Oh, and I didn't even mention this isn't the only video you can watch right now. I've got a whole other one on the burdens of being a god, which is all about the oldest question in the world, and one which shows up in fantasy and sci-fi all the time. How hard is it to be an overpowered godlike entity? And then after you've watched the videos, which I've got up there right now for you to watch, you can watch things like The Sojourn, which is this amazing sci-fi audio drama, which I really think people will love, especially if you liked something like Pantheon, you're gonna love that. It's amazing, big ideas, big sci-fi. There is stuff that I want to tell you about which is coming, but I cannot just yet. But of course, you know what you're going to want to watch way better than me, so the most important thing is that you check it out for yourself. If you're passionate about writing and world building and fiction, then Nebula is where you want to be alongside the hundreds of thousands of other people who have already joined us. And make sure to click my link because it's way cheaper. Link down below, join us today, I will see you there. But let's bring all of this into a beautiful discussion summary. Overpowered characters can create problems for their narratives, meaning we have to find new sources of tension. This can come from the physical and emotional costs of their power, the fallout, the personal and societal struggles it creates for them. 2. Overpowered characters don't need to just be defined by their power. Look at their backstory, their choices, their internal struggles and desires. They're essential to shaping their arc as they potentially become distanced from humanity. 3. These stories dive into the nature of power itself, asking philosophical questions about its use and the impact on those who wield it. 4. The mere presence of their overwhelming power can change how the rest of the world operates and how other characters relate to them. In the end, it's not just Graham the Wizard who likes cast lightning bolt powers which matter, it's how he uses them. Power carries a price. As writers, we get to play with that, what these characters choose to do, what it costs them, and how they navigate a world that's forever changed by the mere presence of their power. And I don't think that we need to sacrifice tension or interest just because there's a huge amount of power involved, just because the story needs to account for that. But I want to know who your favorite OP character is. Let me know down in the comments below. Stay nerdy, stay overpowered, and I will see you in the future.